This video is from my series that walks you through how to build a career in film and television production.
Okay, tracking, specifically how we use it. We track the trades every day. We pull information out of the Reporter, Variety, Deadline, and to some extent IMDb if we're tracking it. Now we're going to go deeper into how we collect the data using the same Danny Trejo article from the past. We're going to take a look at how we pull the data, how we store it in the database, what we collect, and then later we'll take a look at how we go back and pull that data out and how we use it in the future. The purpose of tracking has two functions. Number one, we're collecting intelligence and information about an industry that's pretty opaque and isn't very clear about where to go, what to do, and who to talk to. So we're pulling information out so that we can connect some dots from one person to the next when it comes time for us to look for work or to be connected to the industry. And the second purpose is, as someone who is coming into the industry who doesn't know a lot about it, reading the trades, understanding the landscape, the industry, the players, who finances what, who's making what, what's working, what isn't working, who's producing what, what's getting developed, what's coming down the pike, all those kinds of things you see in the trades on a daily basis. We want to be able to track that information and just gain some knowledge about how the industry works and who we want to talk to and who we want to avoid. The obvious question of who has money, who's producing, who's making shit, we talked about that already. If someone says, hey man, it's pro rate, everyone's getting paid the same rate, what that basically means is you're going to get fucked. So we do those shows just as a favor. We do it for a friend. We do it to get credits. We do it to build up our resume, to fill white space. Sometimes we do it just because we need to make money. We haven't worked for a while. I call those money jobs. We haven't worked for a while, but we do need to make a living. It might not show up on our credits. It may be something we ignore and don't tell anyone. Obviously, we're not going to hide it, but it's maybe not, it's not serving a purpose of moving our career forward in a particular vertical, doing a particular kind of work. So we may not put it on our credits because it doesn't make sense. Like I said, unless we want to fill space. But we still might take those jobs. But that doesn't mean that we have to include it on our credits. But getting back to the point, we read the trades to track what's going on so we know who the players are, what the real shows are, and what our target is as far as our vertical and what shows we want to work on, and just gain wider understanding about how the industry is organized and who's participating in it. So how do we collect the information that we saw in the Danny Trejo article for American Sicario, and what do we ignore? Obviously, what you pick up and what you leave behind is going to be relevant to you, and you're going to see a pattern and you're going to start to make your own choices about what to collect and what not to collect. In this example, I'm operating from the idea that I don't know exactly what I'm doing yet, so I'm just going to pick up everything because I want to learn it. I want to get it in my head. So let's go back to that article, the Danny Trejo article. In this article, I'm going to want to lift into my database, and you can download this file from this module or the tracking module. We talked about picking up the director. We talked about picking up the production company and picking up the producers. So I'm on a new day, 11/2. Sources, the reporter. Show name, American Sicario. Producers. Now we're going to pick up the producers, which there are a lot. So they're all a bunch of different kinds of producers. There's an executive producer in here. There's other producers. I don't know exactly what they're going to do, but I just want to pick up everything. Do I know who the writer is at this point? I'm just scanning through the article looking for who wrote it. I'm going to copy that. Next, I'm going to go pick up the director, which we already know is Reha Collins. In cast, we know it's Danny Trejo. This doesn't really matter to me necessarily, but I'm going to include it because that's what the article headline was, and this is probably how I'm going to remember it. So there's some more information about what it's based on. Doesn't hurt to include this piece of it. I'll pick it up in the notes. Do I know who's going to be the production company making this title? I don't know. I just know that it's going to be produced by GFG Entertainment. I don't know who the financier is yet, but eventually I'll get that information because I want to know. My guess is GFG Entertainment has an overhead deal somewhere, and they're probably going to be financed by that company. Not always. Sometimes the article will list a little more information, so I'm just clipping through it and seeing if there's anything else in here I want to pick up. It doesn't look like it to me. No, then we go back to some other article. All right, and that's it. That's an example of how I use the trades and tracking for what's in production. I'm interested in this title because it's early on in development or in prep or in some stage of the early part of getting into physical production, because that's what I want to track, because I want to know what exactly is going on, what's getting put into production, and I want to keep track of it so that if I find anybody who I might know on that project, if I wanted to get onto this show, I would just call around town trying to figure out how I can get connected to it. What we want to pick up is the date, the source where we picked up the information, the show or the project, the producers if it's known, the writer if it's known, the director, any cast. I'm picking up the cast because in this particular case, Danny Trejo's name was in the headline of the article that I found. And I'll probably remember that that's who was attached to this particular title. So I may hear from someone and I won't necessarily remember American Sicario. I will probably remember Danny Trejo. I'll definitely not know anything about what the true story is based on, but I at least want to track it. So when I pull something out of memory, I go, Danny Trejo. What was that project 6 months ago? So I'm going to include it here so I can do a search on it. And we'll get to that in just a second, exactly how we do that. I collect the production company if I know what it is, and I collect any notes about it that will help me jog memory, or something that connects dots that isn't producer, writer, director, cast, prodco, that's connected to this particular show. So I just throw it in notes. It could be a note for myself. It could be a note to anything, but I just put notes out there just to help me remember. I'll also put keywords out here as well in notes so that when I do a search, I can find that particular show, because it might be 6 months or 3 months or 4 months later. I've done a bunch of this. I may have 100 different things in this particular database file, and I want to go check out what's going on and connect some dots. So when I go to search for this later, I want to be able to figure out what's going on. So for me, Danny Trejo is going to stick in my head because I know him, I know his name, and I remember it being in the headline of the particular article or the lead part of the article. The other thing I mentioned earlier is whatever metrics you choose to collect, it's entirely up to you. I say start with this set of data: date, source, show, producer, writer, director, cast, prodco, and then some notes, some keywords about yourself. You may find that you want to collect other information, or you may want to find that you want to collect none of this information because you're not, when I say none of this, I mean writer, director, cast. You don't really care. You want to know about producers. That's largely, you'll see that's largely what I've done in the past. I don't really care about writer, director, cast. It doesn't really do anything in my current career as a CFO, but that doesn't mean it won't for you. If you're a writer, you got to want to collect all the writer information and the producer information. If you're a director, same thing, writer and producer. Cast, probably director and producer, not so much writers. Writers do have an impact on cast, but not so much. If you're crew, you want to collect the producer, writer, director, yes. Certainly making those relationships when you're working and you're on set and you have a connection to a writer, which doesn't often happen in that environment, but certainly the director. It's good to get to know those people. So what you choose to collect, it's entirely up to you. I'm only using this as a baseline. This is how I do it. This is what I was taught. And I would suggest you start with the same information. So when you're picking through the trades and you're looking at what you want to include in your database, you're going to want to include information that's relevant to your particular thing. So for me, dramatic television, movies of the week, that's the space I work in at the moment. That's why this stuck out to me. That's why I pulled it. If you're working in award shows or you're working in independent film, episodic television, half-hour sitcoms, you really only are interested in pulling the information that's relevant to your vertical. You don't have to pull everything. Obviously, I'm not a guy who does variety shows. I don't do late night. I don't work in the awards circuit. I'm not going to collect that information. I'm only collecting dramatic TV, hour drama, movies of the week, that kind of information, episodic television. So what's the purpose of the file? The file has two purposes, I said earlier. Number one, you review the trades, you get a landscape of the industry. You're pulling business intelligence and you're storing that information. So if you need to pull it out later or recall it later, it's available to you in some place other than the internet. The internet, the Reporter, Daily Variety, and Deadline are all great sources, but we're just pulling information out of those sources because it's gonna be like drinking from a fire hose every day, reading the trades and trying to pull something out of the internet. The reason I do it into this database, into Excel or a Google Doc, is so that I can have that information that I've found relevant to my vertical and my career and advancing my business into a particular area or into a particular vertical. I'm pulling the information that's relevant to me and putting it to an Excel sheet and collecting a database that's specific to what I'm doing. So I get it in my head. It helps me understand the landscape that I'm currently in, what's tracking, what's working, how it's changing, how it's modifying. That's why I do this. Just letting it live out there at the sources where we get it and then going, I wanted to go get that thing. It's literally trying to find a needle in a haystack. This just distills it all down and puts it in one place. The other thing is it puts it in chronological order too, by date and by source. So we can go find what's out there and I can sort these data fields however I want to look at them, either by cast, maybe by producer, and then I can search within the file as well. Tracking this data also helps us understand how the industry is structured. Who finances projects? Are there new players coming in as far as producers or financiers? Are there new sources of capital that are coming into production? And it also widens our net outside the United States and does provide some information that you'll pick up as you're gleaning and reading the trades. You'll start to see how the international marketplace is organized and how it's different than the United States. The other important element of tracking this information that isn't as obvious as you would think, and believe me, it goes a long way. And that is, it demonstrates to your target interviews that you're current, you're relevant, and that you're paying attention. A good friend of mine used to say 50% of the job in entertainment is just showing up. There's a lot of truth in that. And there's a lot of people who just don't show up. They say they're going to do something, and they don't, or they say they're going to do something, they show up, but they're mentally unprepared. They're useless. They don't actually contribute. You know, contributing and being relevant and being part of the process is as much part of the job as anything else. This is a competitive business. You have to separate yourself from the rest of the people who come here to do something and do it really half-assed. The way you do that is by being relevant and current. You get relevant and current by reading the trades, tracking what's going on in your vertical and your area and your path so that you can demonstrate that you're a valuable asset and indispensable to the person you're working with, so that you can demonstrate to the people you meet that you have skill such that they will sponsor you for other jobs and pulling you up into the next job. The other thing is this helps us connect dots. You'll start to see producers on repetitive names that repeat themselves. I'm just going to pick people, just Brian Walker, because it's the easiest one to say. Brian Walker. You might see Brian Walker's name on American Sicario. You may have seen him on something else in the past. I can go to IMDb, do a research about who Brian Walker is. What has he worked on? I don't know him, but he may have worked on a show with somebody else who I do know. And I can pick up the phone or email or text to that person that I do know and say, hey, you're working with Brian Walker. What's going on? That's interesting. And just start a casual conversation about this show, American Sicario. If it's on my target list and I have a connection to Brian Walker through somebody else, I'm going to go call that person and say, hey, man, I saw that you worked on whatever the show was, and Brian Walker was on it. Did you have any experience with him? And then that could lead you to getting a connection and a referral from the person you do know that also has worked with Brian Walker. I'm not saying they're going to know one another, these people you might be able to connect dots with, but it's better than what you have now, which is nothing. This dude, Brian Walker, I don't know him. I have no idea how to get to him, but I could go through his credits, go take a look at what he's done, and connect the dot. Here he is, Brian Walker. He's an AD, second unit director. That's his background. Do I clip through his credits? Sure. Do I know someone on any of these shows? Possibly. So let's say I know Michael Grassi. So I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Michael, I saw that you work with Brian Walker on Lost Girls. And he says, yeah, he's great. And then the next part of the conversation is, can you make an introduction? I'm really interested in what he's working on in American Sicario. So you've done two things. You've connected dots, you're relevant in the industry with Michael Grassi, and you can help yourself get connected to American Sicario through this database to where we're collecting information. That's the connecting the dots. You call around town, you learn what's going on, you stay relevant, and you connect dots. You're tapping into your network. You're using this data file to connect dots and to tap into your network to try to get connected from one person to the next. Now I understand. This is a cart before the horse problem. You don't have a wide network, or you don't have a network at all. You're building that network. But in the process of doing this, I'm using this as an example of where you're headed, how you're going to use this data, and how you're going to execute it and put it into your workflow so that you can expand your audience, you can expand your network, expand your ability to get additional work in the future. You may not have a wide network now, but you will. Over time, you will build a network, and that network will widen. It will become large and wide very quickly. Because you work in entertainment, you work in small sprints. You work on shows for weeks or months at a time. You meet 125 people in many cases. Some of these crews are as big as, most crews on most of these shows are at least 150 people, and some are as high as 300. So you're going to meet a bunch of those people. You're not going to meet everybody, but you're going to meet a bunch of those people. I'm not talking about the names we all know, right? The names we hear about in the news, the ones we see in the entertainment magazines. Those are the famous people. But there are hundreds of thousands of people in the background who actually make this stuff happen. And they're names and people that you want to get connected to, that you can build a wide audience to. And it's not like your normal corporate job where you go work someplace, you might meet 20 or 30 people, you do it for 2 or 3 years. In a matter of let me take a step back. You do that for 2 or 3 years with a particular employer, you go to another job, you work there for 2 or 3 years, you've now worked 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years at 2 places, having met maybe 100 people. In the course of working on one show over the course of maybe anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, you will have been introduced to at least 100 people on that one show. So your network is going to widen really fast. Your intention is to get on shows, to get into assistant jobs, and meet as many people as you can. Being relevant and being connected is the job. So your network is going to widen very quickly. So don't lose sight of that. This is an industry where your friendships and your network is going to turn over very quickly. That's the other important thing about this part of the process. As you're starting, you want to work as many places as you possibly can and spread yourself out so that you're not just working for one producer, one company, one hiring manager over and over and over again. You want to build your network. You want to widen it early. And the way you widen that network is by working with as many people as you possibly can. If you choose to be working for one person over and over, you're going to get stuck with those people. And that's fine if that's what you want to do, if you want the security of that. But if they decide to go on vacation, they get sick, whatever, their career's over, they lose a contact somewhere, they've only done the same thing you've done, which is they're only integrated at one place, all of a sudden you're at the mercy of that person or that company or that group of people. A prop man told me this, God, many in the early 90s had said to me, don't get on the same show going season to season to season, because you want to widen your network and you don't want to get stuck just on that show. So in production, you're going to have the opportunity to work with a lot of people. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of it when you're young, early in your career, and be social. That's how your network happens. Okay, so I said we were going to talk about the last thing in this puzzle, which is how do you search old data, right? How do you collect information that you've put into the database? It's 6 months from now. And I remembered, oh my God, what's that show? I can't remember the name. Danny Trejo, the dude who owns a taco place or just started the taco place a couple years ago. I type in Danny Trejo and I hit next. So the computer's gonna find it for me. Here it is. All of a sudden I'm like, American Sicario. That was the thing I wanted to collect information for. Or I'm, 2 months on, or maybe even 9 months on, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I wanted to try to connect with that show that 3 Arts was making, and I can't remember who the financier was. And I remember there was a producer called Marshall Boone. There you go. I key it in, and all of a sudden I'm looking at 3 Arts Entertainment Universal Television. There's my answer. I had picked this information up last year from the reporter about Brooklyn Nine-Nine because I was interested in who's financing this. What is it? It started to become popular. Not started to, it had already become popular, but I didn't know anybody there. I knew nothing. I just had remembered reading in the trades and pulling this information out because it's episodic television. It's relevant to what I'm doing. And I wanted to collect more information about this particular project. So that's how I use this database. That's how I use the file. And that's how I go back and search for old information that I have logged, that I've put into my database, and that I'm trying to recall now for some part of my career or part of my business that I want to learn something new about, or I want to get connected to somebody different, or I want to network a little bit wider. So that's it. That's how I use the tracking. That's how I use the trades database. Download the file, read the trades every day, pull out the information that's relevant to your vertical. Once you've picked your vertical, once you've picked your path, you're going to want to collect that information and just start storing it. Eventually, you're going to get this information in your head. You're going to see a pattern about how the industry works, who the players are, who's greenlighting projects, who has money, who's full of shit, who isn't. And then you're going to be making decisions about how to use this information and how to connect and how to widen your network. This is a business of networking. It's not a place where you can be shy, hide in the corner, and have people come to you. Maybe one day you can be that, but when you're starting out, you're going to have to be building a network. And the only way to do that is to connect with people, either by the phone, the email, or text. You have to make friendships and relationships, business friendships. They don't have to be your BFF. That you're going to have that from your family and your friends and your close network from your personal life. But your business life and entertainment will be widened, and it will be very social when you start networking. And the only way you're going to advance your career and advance your business is if you stay networked. The day you stop networking in Hollywood is the day your career begins to atrophy. It is just as simple as that. You don't necessarily have to be a slave to this process, but do at least clip through it every couple days, pull out the information that's relevant to you and your vertical and your path, and put it into your database. That's the key point. So use the tracking, build your own trades database that's relevant to you so that in the future you can reach into it, pull out information, and start connecting dots and widening your network.